Hello ballers, it's question time. I'm going to do 2 of these mailboxes a week because you started to send me a lot of questions. So I'll get through them as best I can. If you've got a question for me, send it to preachgaming@gmail.com. That's preachgaming@gmail.com. In the back you can see me doing the Plants vs Zombies that exists in Old Dalaran Crater. If you want to go and check that out, you can do. It's a bit of a pain in the ass actually. The third quest's pretty tough. But still, it was all good. One-shotted. It is a bit buggy, so bear that in mind. The first question comes from Samson85. He says, Holla Preach, in one of your live shows you discussed how you think LFR has spoiled the game by allowing anyone and everyone to defeat the current end boss. However, you use Looking for Raid constantly for your videos, and there is always a group available at any time of the night. Has your opinion changed on LFR, or do you still think it's a bad thing? I think Looking for Raid is a bad thing for it being available for current content. I don't understand why people who don't raid need to be killing the end boss of the current content. A couple of days, well in fact Madness of Deathwing was released the second reset, but 2 weeks after everybody had killed Deathwing. I don't understand that whatsoever, but I think Looking for Raid itself is absolutely fantastic. It's really good. What I would like to see is Looking for Raid going for older content, because hardly anybody killed Ragnaros in the Firelands. And it drops. You can even have it drop normal mode loot. There's no problem with that. It's still available from the 5-man heroics, and they get the set bonuses and all that kind of stuff. I think that would be more advisable. I really do. Looking for Raid is fantastic. I use it all the time because it's great. I can show you raid settings of content and how to effectively cope in those situations. What I would like to see is Looking for Raid on previous content. That gives people something to strive for. I think we've lost that. Looking for Raid got rid of the idea that we had something to strive for. Like, there's no mysticism with Dragon Soul. There was always a mystic approach. There was always this rumours and talks of raid dungeons and raid bosses. I remember when I first started in Vanilla and Ragnaros was coming. It was a great thing because very few people actually got to see it. Now, the argument is that people pay the same amount as everyone else and they should have access to this content. And the developers also think at Blizzard is that they've created this content and hardly anybody gets to see it because it's too hard, etc. Or you need so many requirements to actually go and see it. I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I really don't. I liked the idea that there was this boss out there who was scary and terrifying. You needed 40 people or 24 people who were decent players to get in and go and see it, and it gave him a sort of aura. Bosses these days don't seem to have that same impact, that same epic feeling. Why? Because we can kill it on Looking for Raid in a very easy manner. Looking for Raid is hardly raiding. It really isn't. It's not very close to raiding whatsoever. There's a few mobs to DPS. Hardly anything can kill you, really. And that's definitely worrying for me, is that if Looking for Raid is always going to be available for the current content, I think they're going to lose subscribers, because I know a lot of people quit after a first month or so of the recent Dragon Soul release, purely because they'd killed Deathwing, and therefore they had no interest in trying to do it on hard mode. Why? It looks pretty much the same. There's a few extra abilities, sure. The gear is irrelevant. We know that for a fact. There's going to be another gear reset. They've already said they're not going to squish the gear, which I think they should for Mists of Pandaria. So without the need of striving for gear, because there is no need for it, and the fact that you've killed the same boss visually, you've been in the same arena as him, you've stood in front of Deathwing while he's been drowning in the Maelstrom. I don't see why that's applicable. I think it spoils the game over the long term. There's only so much Looking for Raid you can do as a casual player. This was supposed to appeal to the casual players, not the players such as myself and many of you who watch who are like invested into the game as, growing yourself personally and being better at the game. Looking for Raid has ruined that as far as I'm concerned. For a casual player who just wants to see the content, they can do that within the first 2 weeks. Casual players, I don't mean bad players by any means. There's a certain difference between casual players and bad players. Casual players don't really care about gear. Why? Because it's no interest to them. They don't raid on a hardcore level. They don't raid on a semi-casual level, really. They tend to be part of a guild that maybe tag along once in a while. They do a bit of PvP, a few 5-man heroics, and they're happy with that. They just want to see the content and enjoy the game. And so by giving them access to defeating the game, essentially, as soon as Looking for Raid comes out, then they lose that anticipation, that feeling that, oh, I'm going to fight Deathwing now. Well, most of us who go to Madness of Deathwing just think, okay, I'm just hoping something drops. We don't care that we're fighting Deathwing, this guy who destroyed Stormwind. We don't care. We really don't. And I think that's sad. I think that's what Looking for Raid has spoiled. I would love Looking for Raid to just be staggered by one tier of rating. fair enough, you didn't get a chance to kill Deathwing all the way through. So when Mists of Pandaria launched, I would like to see a Looking for Raid Dragon Soul introduced then. And therefore, and move it up to an item level which was appropriate for sort of level 90 players getting early 5-man heroic gear. I don't think there's any problem with that whatsoever. They still get to see the content that they couldn't see previously. It just loses the will to go and do it. That's what I think, is to strive to go and kill it. Well, I've already killed Deathwing, so why should I strive to join a guild and tie up my time and experience any other part of the game? I did it in the first 2 weeks of the release of the content. And therefore only the dedicated raiders are the ones who are pushing to see the hard mode content and all that kind of stuff. There's definitely no feeling. And that's what bothers me. A lot of people were asking me when I'd killed Ragnaros, what was it like? What was it like when he comes out of that lava? What was it like to see Ragnaros? You know, I mean, he slaughters raids. And then you talked about Nefarian. When Nefarian lands, people were saying, what was that like? You know, and now people don't ask what was Deathwing like, because they can go and do it themselves. In fact, you look at Ghost, who only reactivated a couple of weeks ago. He's killed Deathwing plenty of times. And therefore, as a casual player, which is what Ghost is a casual player, he's not very much interested in doing anything other than that. And well, that bothers me a little bit. I think that's the only problem with Looking for Raid. I think it should always be one tier of content behind. Gear levels can be adjusted, no problem. There's really no need to say Looking for Raid is there for gear, because the gear is still lower than Fireland's heroic gear. If you get full Looking for Raid gear, you're still pretty much lower than Fireland's heroic gear. That's a 392 item level, so you're not winning on gear either. It's an illusion of gear, and it's the illusion that you're raiding, because you're not. Looking for Raid is not a realistic raid environment. If anything, it's somewhere to test it. We've proved in several videos, healers generally don't play well in Looking for Raid. They spam just AoE healing to cheese meters. DPS can get away with doing absolutely nothing. And tanks generally don't really know what's going on either. How many times have we seen tanks that just simply can't taunt at Ultraxian, things like that? So that's it. My problem with Looking for Raid is I don't believe it should be for current content. I believe it should be for the previous tier content. And in terms of my own videos and my personal views on it, it doesn't matter if I show you a video of me doing Firelands in Looking for Raid or Dragon Soul. The approach I'm giving you is still exactly the same. The rules and regulations and the sort of approach to raiding can be applied to any raid instance whatsoever. So that's my problem with Looking for Raid, really. It's not that I dislike it. I think the idea is wonderful. The fact that you can queue up, you can get into a raid with 24 other people, and you can chill out, and you can have some fun, and you can see some raid bosses that you might not have been able to do because you're not part of a raid team or a regular raiding guild. And that's fine. I just don't think it should be for current content. I think that spoils it so quickly for casual players and just ends up becoming a gear lottery. And that's all it is. You're queuing once a week for the gear lottery, and then you don't really have anything else to do. And I don't think you should have to have killed Deathwing, no matter what level of the game you're at, within 2 weeks of the content coming out. I think that's pretty poor. Moving on. The next question was sent in by Undermined. Breacher! My guild's recently got... Oh, I see what you're saying. My guild recently got our worst mage, Dragonwrath, and he left for a better guild the very next day. Obviously having applied before he got it. We only ran Firelands weekly to get him his staff and do some sell runs for the Ragnaros mount. Some members of the guild have found his new home and spammed his recruitment thread. The new guild doesn't seem to care, as they must have known that he was going to get the staff and didn't want to run Firelands for him themselves. What do you think of this kind of behaviour? Oh, this is classic. We have seen this so many times, especially if you've been playing since vanilla. End of the day, people are arseholes, man. People are serious arseholes in this game. And some people are so focused on loot, it baffles my mind. It really does. Your approach to loot is always different from the next person. I've seen people, best of friends, or I say best of friends, but a lot of us consider the people we've played with in-game for a very extended period of time as close as any friend we would have in real life. I certainly do. I've played with people like Genji and RH since for almost 11 years now. I've played on an almost daily basis with those guys, and I certainly consider them real-life friends. I really do. We've shared a lot of stuff outside of game as well. What do I think of this kind of behaviour? Well, it's obviously shit. It's really shit. There's no doubt about it. The guy's an arsehole. But what I do like what you pointed out there is your worst mage. And the only reason you were doing it was to get him his mount. Because you do feel a sense of obligation to players who've been in the guild to make sure they get what they deserve. And if they've been with you for a while, and he's been doing the quest and that kind of stuff, then your guild is sort of obligated to make sure he gets his staff. It's only fair if you've taken this guy on progression and he's played his part, then and you started the quest and you said, okay, we're going to make sure all the casters get the staff because it helps us overall. I assume by getting a Ragnaros mount, you're doing some heroic modes in Dragon Soul as well. So, as far as the guild's concerned, getting everybody Dragon Wrath and he's still raiding Mage is beneficial to the guild. But he is your worst mage. I assume that's why he's been left this long to get it. Because right now, if anybody of your main roster still hasn't got Dragon Wrath, then there's something pretty wrong there. And you said he's his worst mage. I have seen this happen before where guilds bombard recruitment threads with this guy sucks, this guy's an arsehole, be very wary of this guy, especially with some girls as well. Girl raiders tend to always be treated differently, which is really sad from my point of view. But I suppose that's from the approach that a lot of the people who play WoW are still relatively young, and having a girl player seems like such a big thing. As far as I'm concerned, as long as you do adequate DPS and don't get carried, then I'm fine with whatever sex you are. I don't really care, just as I don't care what race you are or what country you come from, as long as you pull your weight. It's never bothered me, but I'm slightly older than most of the people who play WoW, that's fine. I've always taken the understanding that people will be very bitter when stuff like this happens, and when I've recruited people in the past and their recruitment thread has been absolutely spammed by people with rage and hate, we do ignore it. We have to ignore it. One thing you say there is he's your worst mage, so he's unlikely to make it anyway. Dragon Wrath is very, very common now. Very stupidly common, in fact. It's not difficult to get. It's just a matter of time. And if you can do Firelands weekly, you will get a Dragon Wrath, simple as. He's your worst mage. He's unlikely to survive. I assume he's transferred to a guild that's still progressing in some way, or is farming content. Either way, if he's not a very good player, tends to die a lot, his DPS isn't quite adequate, he will get kicked anyway. That's what we do. We always keep an eye on, even if a thread is absolutely spammed with hate and rage, we always say, we'll just see how he plays. And if he plays bad, we'll fuck him off. Simple as. You know, that's the question of it. One thing you have to always bear in mind is that guilds do this on a regular basis. Why? Because they want progress. Quite frankly, as shit as it may seem, the other guild who is gaining a Dragon Wrath player, especially during progress, doesn't really care what happens to your guild, unfortunately. As much as you must care for your guild and you enjoy it and it's all friends and stuff like that, you've got to bear in mind that the other guilds don't really care about your guild. They don't see it that way. There's a million guilds out there. They don't really care. Nobody cared in Naxxramas when nearly every prot warrior in the game was poached by big guilds because the Four Horsemen needed, 8 warriors or 6 prot warriors, something like that, or 7 prot warriors, and of course guilds didn't have that many geared prot warriors, and they also needed to have their 4-piece set bonus from Naxxramas, which was really hard to get. So they poached prot warriors and main tanks of tons and tons of guilds. It collapsed half of the guild base, it did, and stopped so many people progressing in Naxxramas because tanks were stolen by the major guilds. Now, your mage friend will get what he's just deserved. If he's not up to scratch, he will get kicked and he will be on his own. And how many times have I actually seen quite recently in looking for raid, lots and lots of players who have a ton of gear and are ungilded. These tend to be the arseholes of your guild. These tend to be the loot whores. They tend to be the people who do take the best loot they can get and then jump ship. And they tend to end up guildless pretty fast, actually. It happens all the time. I've seen so many times what we've taken on. We took on a lot of Warglaive rogues. Why? Because it was better for the guild. It was better for our guild. And if a guy applies to our guild and he's got the Warglaives, and they're so much better than what we need, then we're going to take them. It's not our fault that he's leaving his guild. They tend to approach us. I do disagree with guilds poaching other players directly. It's happened to me a couple of times where people have come up to me or whispered me in game and said, hey, would you consider joining our guild? And it's been a guild that is vastly superior. I tend to always hate that. I disagree with it completely. You should not be going to purposely poach other players. I really don't like that. If a guy comes to you and he says, look, I'm getting Dragon Wrath in 2 weeks. There's my World of Logs, which is what these guys usually ask for. There's my World of Logs. I'm getting Dragon Wrath in 2 weeks. and then I'll join. What do you think? It's not our fault. It's not the fault of the guild he's coming to. It really isn't. And if you tell the guild that they don't have to farm Firelands for the next few weeks to get him his staff, they're more than likely really happy with that because they're bored to death of Firelands, simple as. The behaviour itself is awful, but it's all down to that player. It's not the fault of the guild. It's not your fault. You can feel bitter about it all you want, but he's gone. End of story. I'd just let it pass. I've never been one who has raged when I've seen someone ninja a boss. It's happened to me probably 12 or 13 times since vanilla, is I've seen somebody ninja all the loot off a boss and then quit the guild in Hearthstone. It doesn't bother me at all, but then again, I don't particularly care for loot. I'm not interested in items whatsoever. Items are a means to an end, and that's all they are. You know, once progression is done, I really don't care. I don't like farming a lot. I like to skip as much farming as possible, and I also came up with, for most guilds that I've been in, is ways of reducing how much time we need farming. Can we drop a healer? Can we do this? Can we try this in a different way? And just absolutely get our farming and kill times down to an absolute minimum. So we're in and we're out and get out and done. Spamming his recruitment thread is, you know, what can you say? It doesn't have much effect on the guild he's going to, unless that guild is particularly wary of people who carry baggage. Although I have seen many players who have had all this recruitment spam done in their thread, and you just tend to look at it as the old guild is bitter because they're losing a legendary mage. And like you said, that guild was probably aware he was going to get Dragonwrath before he came. So you can't really complain at that guild saying, this guy took Dragonwrath and then left our guild for yours. He's a loot whore. The other guild's probably already aware of that, unfortunately. They probably already know. And again, it's not the guild's fault. It really isn't. It's up to the player to do that. What I will say is that guild will not be giving that player specific loot priorities for a very long time. We do bear that in mind when we recruit people like this. If we see someone say, hey, I'm going to get a legendary in a week's time, but I want to join for a better guild, you don't have to fire Firelands, and then I'll join you. Fine, join us, but you will not be getting any form of special treatment in terms of loot for a very long time until you've proved yourself, because we know you're the type of person who will leave when he gets good loot. At the moment, though, you can help us. You and your legendary staff can certainly help us progress. Maybe we can get that Spine of Deathwing kill. Maybe we can get that Madness of Deathwing kill. We don't care. We don't even care if we then kick you straight after. I've seen that as well. We've recruited people who've had legendaries and so on, and then as soon as we've killed the last boss, they get kicked because usually they're getting carried by their legendary. This was very true of Shadowmourne as well. Shadowmourne and Warglaves are the most notorious for this. It's not really happened in Cataclysm with the daggers, because the daggers you tend to finish the content before you get the daggers anyway. Similar with Dragonwrath, it got nerfed down. It's not that different really to using a Lightning Rod heroic. It is more DPS, don't get me wrong, but it's not that different, you know. But back in the day, Warglaves and Shadowmourne was so massively overpowered, it was clear to see that those players were being carried by that specific weapon, and their play overall was absolutely not very good, but their DPS was so awesome because they were using these legendary weapons. So they tend to get kicked, or they're not very well liked in the guild anyway. And when people aren't liked in the guild, they tend to leave. It brings me on to the subject of, you know, what is a guild to you? What do you think a guild is? There is only one defining factor of a raiding guild, and that is that everybody in the guild is there to raid. Everybody's not there to be best of friends. Although we'd like to be super best friends with everybody, it's not going to happen, especially in a raid guild. There will be always somebody who doesn't like you, doesn't agree with how you play, doesn't particularly like your attitude. It's happened to me all the time. You guys who watch my videos probably think I'm a very likable person. At least that comes across to the majority, otherwise people wouldn't subscribe to me. But I've certainly encountered many people who really disliked me, although I never really understood why. And I apply that to my RL as well. If people really dislike me for some bizarre reason, I have no interest in them whatsoever. I don't give them the time of day. If I feel like you're being purposely obnoxious towards me for some reason, especially since I started the YouTube stuff as well, you know, I don't join guilds to be best friends with everybody. I'm pretty certain that I'll be friends with quite the majority of people and we'll get on well. But I certainly don't expect to be friends with everybody. Absolutely not. There's some crazy people who play WoW. You've got to understand that. Some very bizarre people. I mean, after writing this message, would see that as obscene to take a legendary weapon and then leave the guild. I would never do that. I personally would never do that. This guy would. He just lives by a separate set of values to you. And plus he sees it as a game, and he can use this to move himself up in the rankings. Although wherever he's gone, he's likely not a very big guild if they're still working on a Deathwing Heroic or every kind of progress they need him for. It's unlikely they would have taken him if they had finished the content. Let's get a Dragonwrath Mage now we've finished the content. But as he said, getting back on topic, he's your worst mage. So Dragonwrath won't help him that much. It really won't. If he's not a good player, he will be removed from the guild rather swiftly. And probably his personality will come out in that. I wouldn't hate on it. I would try and just ignore it as best you can. Like I said, when I've seen people ninja all the loot from a first kill of an endgame boss, it doesn't bother me. You'll kill it again. Bye-bye him. Spread the word that this guy's bad. If you want to put something in his recruitment thread, do so. I personally don't do that. I just think it's a waste of time. The guild's already accepted him. He's likely to have moved already accepted. Or if he thinks he's just going to sell it and make some shitty YouTube video out of it. I ninja'd this boss. Grats to you, man. You're a waste of time. That's nothing to do with me. It doesn't bother me. We'll kill it again. There's only been 1 or 2 items that I've actually needed when I've been farming gear to get gear capped that have never dropped. And it wasn't because they were ninja'd. It's just because they didn't drop. Eventually, anything that has been ninja'd has also dropped again. So don't worry about it. Just be a little bit careful that if there is somebody in your guild who feels he's deserving of something from you, is that you discuss, well, why hasn't he got it yet? And if it's something like Dragonwrath, which is a huge commitment from the guild as a whole, I would certainly bear in mind that maybe you should just say, look, we're not going to do Firelands anymore. If you want to get it, go ahead and get it. And then if he leaves, he leaves. Because then, you know, he's only there for the staff. Plenty of people didn't get the staff. A lot of guilds stopped farming Firelands. Don't worry about it. Just let it go. You're not your problem. That's me done for the day. Again, any questions you want to send me, send to preachgaming@gmail.com. It's preachgaming@gmail.com.